Salvete omnes, and this is Acroasis XXXII, or Act Video 32, and we're going to be talking about reflexive pronoun and adjective. So first, what is a reflexive pronoun? A reflexive pronoun are pronouns that reflect the action of the sentence back onto the subject. And what I mean by that is that essentially the subject performs the action on themselves. For example, he hit himself. So himself is your reflexive pronoun here. Now, how does that work in Latin? Fairly simply. You have the first and second person will use the regular first and second person pronouns. So nothing will change there. It's just how they're being used. So for example, pulso me, I hit myself. Third person, however, is going to use a new pronoun, which is sui, sibi, se. So sui, sibi, se is the pronoun that is both singular and plural. It does not have a nominative form because it is merely the reflexive pronoun. It only reflects action back onto the subject, so therefore it doesn't need to ever be the subject. So sui is the genitive form, sibi is the dative, accusative is se, and ablative is se. And occasionally we'll see the emphatic accusative ablative form, which is se. So it translates as any third person self, depending on what your subject is. So it can be him, her, or itself, as well as themselves. So now let's take a look at some examples. So I would like you to translate these sentences that use the forms of sui, sibi, se, and se in your notes. I will be checking for these tomorrow. So, medica sibi remedium creat, mater et Kaiser se dilexerat. Make sure you pay careful attention to your tenses of the verbs. Take a moment, pause the video, and write out your translations for these. Resume when you are ready. Okay, now let's check your work. The doctor creates a cure for herself. And we know it's a female doctor because it's a medica as opposed to a medicus. Next, number 2, Mother and Caesar had loved themselves. And of course, we're saying had loved because it's dilexerat. And it's mother and Caesar as our subject, so therefore it's themselves rather than just himself or herself. Now let's take a look at how it appears with an adjective. Now, just like meus and tuus and noster and wester exist for my, mine, my own, your own, and our own, and also your all's own, we have suus aum, which stands for his, her, or its own, as well as their own. And just like meus and tuus, it declines in the same way, using the first and second declension adjective endings. However, there is one exception, the difference between eius and eorum and suus aum. So eius and eorum we've already learned, the third person personal pronouns. We use these when we're talking about somebody else, meaning not the subject's possessions. Suus is when you're actually talking about the subject's own possessions. So, for example, let's take these two sentences. Cicero eius amicum videt. Cicero sees his friend. Now, this his, eius, is not Cicero's friend. Because if it was Cicero's friend, I wouldn't use eius, but I would use a form of suus. So take a look at the sentence in the second one. Cicero suum amicum videt. Cicero sees his own friend. So here, suum is used to refer back to the subject, specifying that it is actually Cicero's friend we're talking about, whereas eius could be anybody else's friend, right? So that is the difference between those two pronouns when you would use eius and eorum as opposed to suus aum. Suus aum, you're only going to use when the subject is possessing the objects, not when it's somebody else in the sentence. So now let's take a look at a couple of different ways to express this. So again, translate these sentences to use forms that use the forms of suus, meus, and tuus. So 1, sua facta aluerat. 2, ola mea matram dilexi. And 3, tuum signum vides. Take a moment and translate these sentences in your notes. Pause the video now and resume when you are ready. All right, let's check your work. Number 1, sua facta aluerat. He had cherished his own deeds. So here, sua, although it ends in a, so you might think her own, it's only ending in a because it's agreeing with facta. Number 2, olim mea matram dilexi. Once I loved my own mother. So here, meam is the reflexive version of for dilexi because I am the subject, so may on my own mother. Of course, in English, you would also say I loved my mother, which is perfectly fine as well. Number 3, tu signoides, you see your own sign or signal. Now, again, similar to number 2, we normally would drop the own, but you see your sign signal is just as fine in English as well. So that is it for this Acroasis. Make sure you fill in the Google form and ask any questions that you need to. Of course, if we end up missing your question in class, don't be afraid to ask. Waleteones.